And we are live. A pleasant good evening to our viewers. This is A Few Good Men, and we just will give a few seconds to get our viewers on. Willem, Sam, what's going on?
The Jameses
All right.
are
Jameses are together.
Gotta say that word different. The Jameses is.
The Jameses is.
All right, guys. Friday, and it's good to be back tonight.
It's good to be back tonight. Yep, we have an interesting conversation. We have our guests in the back end. I'm just welcoming our guests, our viewers. Thank you so much for being loyal and tuning in on a Friday. All right, guys, we're gonna get started shortly. Just giving people just a few minutes to come on. Guys, just remember that in the last half hour, we'll dedicate that portion to our the comment section. So you can send in your questions, your any suggestions, anything. You just let us know. Give us your feedback. This helps the channel to grow. Hit the like button, guys. Hit the like button and share the live. Share the live, guys. All right. I see we have here Miriam. Hello. Thank you for joining. Guys, hit the like button and the share button. Let's get people on this live. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Actually, a conversation that is long overdue. Mental health from a Black perspective, from our perspective, from a Caribbean perspective. Yeah.
It so almost didn't exist a few years ago,
What's that, Sam?
It almost didn't exist a few years ago. You would never hear about that.
You never hear about that, eh? Well, if you have never heard of that topic in the Caribbean, today you will be hearing it today or this evening on this live. All right, guys, we have our guests in the back end, and I believe, let's get the conversation started. All right, so guys, welcome to A Few Good Men. All right, so it's a social media program, where you get genuine answers from real men about real life issues. Now it's a show where men reveal their biggest pet peeves, about the opposite sex, relationships, dating, while offering relationship advice from experience. The program will also dive deep, and that's most importantly, we'll dive deep into some serious topics pertaining to current affairs, politics, religion, lifestyle issues, and most of all, dysfunctional behaviors, of both men and women that we have normalized in today's society. Now, today's topic is generational trauma and borderline personality disorder. All right. Now, many Black psychologists say that we suffer from post-traumatic slavery disorder passed down from generation to generation. Now, this theory of post-traumatic slavery disorder was first published by Dr. DeGruy after 12 years of quantitative and qualitative research. The findings was published in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. Now, the book addresses the residual impacts of generations of slavery and opens up the dialogue or the conversation on how the Black community, our community, especially in the Caribbean or in the diaspora, can use our strengths that we have gained in the past to heal in the present. Now, within the Caribbean context, we too suffer from post-traumatic slavery disorder, based on what the psychologist indicated. And she added that we have also experienced our own unique traumas that we have suppressed because of that learned behavior as a result of our legacy of slavery, we are socialized into not seeking professional help. But now, how does that now affect our personality and our daily lives? So therefore, this program will dive deep into the unknown world of Black psychology and the residual lasting psychological effects of the transatlantic slave trade. All right, guys, I want to just introduce our guest so we could start a conversation. Now, our first guest, he's currently pursuing his Doctor of Psychology degree in clinical psychology, following his completion of his master's in counseling psychology at UWI. Now, let's welcome psychologist Josh Hector, the founder of Optimal Solutions, on the program, as we prepare to talk about or discuss generational trauma and borderline personality disorder. So let's welcome Josh to the platform.
Welcome, Josh.
Josh, how are you, my brother?
I'm doing good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Josh, are you here?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Wonderful. Good. You're now a part of a few good men. We appreciate you being on the platform, and we're going to have some lengthy discussions on the topic. But I want to introduce our next guest. Now, our second guest is no stranger to the field of journalism. Now, Kellon Bob, or Dr. Bob, is an associate professor of communication, and he was a graduate of the Harvard University, where he attained his PhD in health and development communications. Now, he's also presently the host of the Bob Report, a live stream program on Facebook where he tackles social, economic, and political issues that is currently plaguing our society. So let's welcome to the platform, Dr. Kellon Bob. My pleasure.
Good evening. Good evening to you, Colin, and to your co-host.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Yes, it's good to be here.
Wonderful. I appreciate. Guys, before we even start the conversation, share the live, guys. Hit the like button. And also, in the last half hour of the program, we will be entertaining questions from the comment section to our guests. And we're going to have, a wonderful discussion here. Now, before we start, I want to just highlight something that happened earlier today. Someone reached out to me, actually posted a comment on our page. And I wouldn't identify who the person is, but I would just like to read the comment. Now, the person said, as a critical free thinker, I have a big problem with the P.T.S.S. So he's talking about post-traumatic slavery syndrome, right? I don't believe this or were the real cause of what we're experiencing today. So he don't believe that essentially we suffer from P.T.S.S. Over 500 years of slavery has gone and passed, and yet we're still blaming everything on slavery. Now, I took offense to that, and I respectfully disagree with him. He's someone that I know, I've seen around, and I'm glad that he's actually in tune, and I hope he's looking at this platform because there's some information that I think he needs to understand context. Very quickly again, I would just like to throw out this question, not to be answered now, but just to really start the discussion. I remember years ago when I too had questions about why are we so dysfunctional as a people. And a woman in the early 2000s, she put me sit down and she explained to me, she said, she made up this hypothetical situation of a dog. And you put a dog, let's say I have a puppy and I put a puppy in a cage and I lock that cage and let's just say hypothetically that dog survives and grows, but obviously he's going to grow deformed and so forth. And one day, after years of being in a cage locked up, I say, okay, I open the cage and say, no, you're free. The question she asked me, and the question I'm putting forward here today, is that who's responsible for the dog's condition and who's to blame? All right, so who takes responsibility and who's to blame for the predicament of the dog? All right, that question, I hope that I'll get an answer to that. But let's get into the conversation. All right, so I'm directing my first question to the psychologist, Josh. Josh, are you ready?
Yep.
All right.
I
know it. Okay, so I know you did your homework, and I appreciate you for doing that. Right. My first question. Now, are you aware of the findings of Dr. Joy DeGruy in her research on post-traumatic slavery disorder? And if so, I would really just like to get your views on it.
Okay.
When it really says psychology, yes.
I actually became aware of the work of Dr. DeGruy when you asked me the question, right? So prior to that, I had not encountered that work or her research at all. But at the same time, right, based on the history, based on where we are coming from, and based on what would have been done throughout the period of slavery, what I can see without a shadow of a doubt would be some lasting impact, right? We can definitely see that we would have been impacted by slavery in certain respects. We can actually see existing now some of Mr. Willie Lynch's his document, The Making of a Slave. We can
internet. I know the internet's a bit shaky. We apologize for that, but
And
let's see if
actually
he will.
see that some of the hello, were you still hearing me?
No, all right. So your internet went a bit as we're struggling with internet here in the Caribbean or in Grenada. But continue.
Yes. Yes. So what can we do? Yes. So what I have noted, even as I would have considered the origin of psychology, which would have made room for the later development of African psychology, African American psychology, which expanded through the diaspora. What I would have had to see was what I had to see, or what I got to see rather, was a fight for a seat at the table to say, this is who we are, this is why we actually want to do things to address this situation here, but we have had some challenges because of our origin. And so, without a shadow of a doubt, is the connection stable?
Wonderful.
Yeah, you're finish.
Right. So without a shadow of a doubt, I definitely see the perpetuation of a certain type of trauma. And let's be honest, right? We cannot necessarily do a blanket diagnosis that would cover every living person of African descent, because there are some of us who are far gone in terms of our development at this time. But at the same time, we have those of us who are also still affected for whatever the reason may be. We still have a perpetuation of some sort of trauma related to the transatlantic slave trade at this time. So it is visible, and I think as we move on, we could talk about that a bit more. But ultimately, though, I hope we come to a climax where we actually decide what we are going to do as a result, because we are the ones to help ourselves.
I totally agree. And Sam, just hearing what he said, I totally agree. But we have to start the conversation, and in the Caribbean, we have not had that conversation. We have not had that conversation. So how can you heal from something that you have no knowledge of? And Kellen, I want to just bring you in here before I get some feedback from the Jameses in the panel here. Just hearing from Josh and what he indicated, and actually I appreciate that you saying that this is a learning experience for you, because like I said, in psychology, because it's so generalized, we're more or less excluded from the conversation, because no one is actually looking into our unique situation from a cultural perspective and from a historical perspective. So Bob, I just want to bring you in on this conversation.
Yes, but I am chomping at the bit here to rebut to the comment. You said that your friend indicated to you that we should get over slavery. There is always this narrative that we should get over slavery, forget the past. And, Black people tend to have this victim mentality. And because we have this victim mentality, that we cannot move forward as a people, we cannot help ourselves, we cannot be self-reliant and things like that, without recognizing that these impacts are deeply embedded into the socioeconomic body politic of our societies. And so I want to open there, but also to agree with what the points that Mr. Hector has been making with respect to those psychological impacts. And I want to begin with a particular, just to give you an example of how that generational trauma occurs. Okay, so let us go back, and for context here, let us also appreciate that slavery did not last for a century. It did not last for a decade. This was hundreds of years of systematic oppression, hundreds of years of the rape of our African sisters, hundreds of years of the separation of African families, hundreds of years of beatings and mutilations, hundreds of years of just that psychological torture with respect to things like, imagine the psychological impact that one has, where the child that you brought forth for 9 months is taken away from you, right? And sold onto another plantation. That is a traumatic event that occurred for hundreds of years. So for people to suggest that we should just get over it and forget the past and move on, to me is extremely sacrilegious and it's extremely disrespectful to our ancestors, especially those who resisted that particular enterprise of slavery. But let us also talk about our Jewish brothers and sisters. Do we tell the Jews who suffered in the Holocaust that they should get over the Holocaust? Do we tell the Vietnamese that they should get over what happened to them with the American invasion of Vietnam? Do we tell the Iraqis that they should get over 2 illegal wars that were impacted on their society by way of imperialism? We have to stop this. We have to stop this idea that we have to get over slavery and just move on like that. Because to Josh's point, these examples exist. And going back to just that transgenerational trauma of transgenerational transmission of trauma. Okay.
Yeah.
So let us go back. Let us go back to picture ourselves on a slave plantation in Soubise in Grenada. There was a Soubise slave plantation in Grenada. A traumatic event takes place in the past. A child gets separated from mother on the plantation and is sexually assaulted. Let's say that child is a little girl, sexually assaulted by a plantation owner and then sold off to another plantation. Okay. What is the psychological impact of that on the mother? So on the mother fears that all future children she will bring into the world will run the risk of the same outcome. Okay. So therefore, she develops a particular defensive posture in order to deal with that. Now, what does that look like with respect to behavioral impact? Okay. That mother who was traumatized by the separation of a child then proceeds to chastise all future children in advance of their separation from her. Okay. As a form of protection based on fear. So in other words, that mother will beat their child before that slave master comes to that child and beats that child, as a means, as a mechanism of protecting that child from being sold to another plantation. Okay. We see that example today. The beatings that some of us mete out to our children, that is still very present in society. Generational transfer. Chastised that child who gets beaten on the plantation grows up to be a mother or a father and develops the same learned behavior from the previous generation. Okay. Based on that fear that that mother demonstrated or that father demonstrated. So then you might ask, well, what is the long-term impact of that? Okay. That child's freedom of expression, okay, can potentially be stunted and hindered, okay, due to the passing on of that particular practice. So for people to say that, well, you know, we cannot see these things in real life is laughable. These examples exist. And let me give you another example of that psychological trauma. We have people say that it's a phenomenon of bleaching. Well, bleaching might be a phenomenon because we have the chemicals now to be able to actually physically bleach our skin. But that is a particular psychological mindset that was developed as a result of slavery. And some may say, well, how is that an issue of slavery? Colorism was an issue of slavery, okay? The lighter skinned slaves, the mulattoes, were given quasi rights. They were given quasi citizenship rights in places like Haiti. That's why they were a power, a structure in Haiti during the time of the Haitian Revolution. It was the lighter skinned people who had that kind of privilege in society. They were not fully free, but certainly they had privilege. So that is another example. In the 70s in Grenada, in the 60s in Grenada, only light-skinned women could work in the bank and light-skinned people. Okay, now we have the phenomenon of bleaching. That is not new. That is also an example of intergenerational trauma. So I would stop here. and allow the other people to, because I can go on. I can
No,
go
no.
on.
And we appreciate it. But I like the fact that you're passionate and the fact that you brought up the whole Jewish Holocaust during Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
A matter of fact, there was a research that I came across that said that they found in 2015 a study was conducted on children or survivors of the Holocaust, and they had changes to their gene, right, as a result linked to the levels of cortisol, a hormone involved in the stress response. Now, just imagine, just look at the short span of time that the Jewish member of the Jewish community had to go through an Holocaust, and their generations after have the residual effects. So it's kind of disrespectful, as Dr. Bob says, to tell African and the descendants of African people to just get over it. So before I bring in Josh on, oh, sorry, I see you. All right, indicating. So let me bring in Josh on that conversation.
Yeah, I want to jump in again to
Yes. No.
to also of course I'm not deviating in any shape or form because
No.
I feel like we're going in the same direction. Just to present this notion, this fact rather. Slaves were actually not captured, right? Slaves were not captured. Human beings were, who later on, after becoming enslaved, somebody decided, well, we have to actually systematically turn these people into slaves, right? And I point in the direction of William Lynch in 1712, who he was a guy who actually presented himself to say, hey, why are you having so much trouble with your slaves? This is what you should do in order to keep them in line. And Dr. Bob would have started, mentioning a couple of those in terms of putting the lighter skinned ones against the darker ones, putting the old male against the younger male and vice versa, old female against younger female, and back and forth. A number of practices that literally transformed the minds of these people who were now enslaved. And here's the thing. If you want anything to be ingrained in a people, ensure that it is repeated. Repetition is a powerful thing. Repetition is the reason why habits are formed. And so, because of the repetition over the course of time, over the entire period, now, after this period, we actually see remaining some impact of the creation of slaves. We see the fear, the suspicion, low self-esteem, aggression, and as Dr. Bob said, the trauma is then passed on to children. And I would just close this bit by saying, when pain is not healed, it is transferred. When pain and trauma remains unresolved, what happens to that individual is that they really pass it on to someone else. And this is what would have been happening throughout the years. And I just recall a quote from the late great, not a quote, but a line from the late great Robert Nesta Marley, who said, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery." You mentioned a while ago, Curlin, that if you have a dog locked up and then you finally let it go, who's responsible for
and who's to blame? Yes.
And who's to blame, right? Who's to blame?
Right. Who's responsible and who's to blame? That's the question that was posed to me years ago. Yeah.
Right? And who's to blame? Really and truly, yeah. And this is where we have to go, because what happens now is that even though the dog is now free, the dog has learned helplessness, and learned helplessness is a concept whereas you actually treat a person in such a way that causes them to believe that they cannot, that they will not, that they are less than. Even if you remove the restrictions, that concept, that mindset, it literally remains. And what do you give except that which you have gotten? What do you pass down except that which has been handed down to you? And so this is a significant part of the challenge.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give the answer that was given to me because I was back then. I was like, oh, okay, I don't understand the question. How do I respond? But I'll give the answer. So, all right. So I want to bring in Sam and Willem. I'm glad the fact that y'all are together, man. I appreciate y'all making it easy for me. So I want to bring y'all in the conversation because we're talking about mental psychology, the psychology of Black people, and we're going to relate to mental illness because it all has a link that's passed down from generation to generation, and then we crown it off with diagnosis of mental issues of today, right? So I just want to get y'all take on the conversation. Having you, I mean, your experience, you live in Grenada, you see the dysfunctional behaviors, some more so than others. I would just like you to chime in on this conversation.
Well,
Anyone? Yeah.
growing up, what I started realizing is that there are some parts of us that we want to hold on to. And there's a particular scripture that almost all Caribbean parents tend to want to hold on to, regardless of their religious persuasion, which is spare not the rod and spoil the child. And they would disagree with everything else in the Bible except that part because they want to be able to justify beating their children to get them to conform. And they don't understand where it came from, and they don't understand that it was used as a form of control over Black people. And somehow we believe that when we use physical force, it helps people to become, a better contributor to society. And it's something that we can see in a lot of Black countries, and we can see right here in Grenada. No, what was mentioned earlier regarding repetition and learned helplessness. Now, when we look at the way and I don't like to get into politics, but whenever you want somebody to remember you, um, or to subscribe to the way you think, get them to repeat certain slogans. And so when you look at rallies and all these kind of things, and you'd hear people repeating certain things, I sit and I think, some people don't even know what they're doing because certain political parties have particular slogans, and people don't understand the psychological effect it has on them. But this is something that comes from years of study, and it was used on us. And it is unfortunate that our own Black people would use it against ourselves, especially the learned ones. They understand the psychology of mankind, that you can use certain tools of control to get people to be on your side. And and it goes hand in hand with learned helplessness, because a lot of our people believe that we need to depend on a system, especially a government, and we are hardly ever divorced from our parents because we are not properly prepared as Black people to go out into the world. And it translates to so many different aspects of our lives. And it's something that is very systemic in Black people, which I noticed. And I was very happy to come across Dr. DeGruy's video a couple of years ago where she spoke about Black people, and it helped me understand myself, because you would look at um, social media and you would hear people saying that Black people need to get over things. And I was wondering, what is wrong with us? Why is it that we can't get over it? And it's only when I came across her research that I understand that this is a real problem. And we can't just shake ourselves off and continue. And somehow we are the only people who are asked to shake ourselves off and continue. And we have things like anti-Semitism, right? Where if you say things, negative things about the Jews, somehow you're crucified and nailed to a cross, right? And this originated in a country where actually Black people are in, right, that are still suffering, and somehow the oppressors choose to separate one group of people and still keep others oppressed, and it's very insulting. And I tell people, if it weren't for opportunities and money and whatnot, I think that it's an affront to Black people to even be living in the United States because they're not wanted there. It is not a system that's created for them. However, if people are getting benefits from it, then kudos. I think everybody should go for what they want in life and if there are benefits. However, we're the only people who are asked to live with our oppressors in the United States and certain countries, and we have to shake it off at the same time. And someone asked me, what's the difference between American Blacks and Caribbean Blacks? And I tell them this. When a Caribbean person goes to live in the United States, at the back of our minds, if things go terribly wrong, we have a home in the Caribbean to go to, but Black people in the States have nowhere to go. And they're forced to live in the same place and dwell in the same home with the people who put them in the situation in the first place. And that is why I believe, I'm no psychologist, but I can understand why there are marked differences between Black Americans and Caribbean, because we can jump a plane and we can come home. At the back of our minds, this is not home for us. We've made it our homes, but at the end of the day, we have somewhere to go. So the nomads of the world, are asked to just shake hundreds of years of oppression off and just carry on. And the sad part of it is that I'm hearing it being repeated by a lot of Black people, and it's a shame. And it's time we understand that we need healing, we need counseling, and counseling is something that Black people don't necessarily embrace.
We would get into that. We'll get into that conversation.
And it's not usually a part of our conversation, but it's something that is needed. And I'm glad that this doctor embarked on this study, and so I could understand myself as a Black man, because after hearing her, I was renewed, and I felt good about myself, better about myself as a Black man, and I wish more people would understand what she's trying to do for us.
I want to just bring in Willem quickly here before I direct a question to Dr. Bob, and then I'll go to Josh after. So, Willem, I just want to get from you, because how old were you when you fully understand the nature or the extent to which our ancestors suffered? Because, and I just want to give that example. I remember doing history in school, and you would think that these people were happy whistling, working. You understand what I'm saying? But years later, when you do your own research, you get to realize that even in the Caribbean, like I don't think we understand how hard we worked on the plantation. A matter of fact, there's a grave site that was dug up recently, and with forensics, they can tell what has happened. And some of the bones will tell you that the muscle used to detach from the bone.
Oh, yeah.
This is not by injury, this is overexertion. I don't think people understand that. So how old were you when you really understood the gravity of how hard our ancestors worked and the trauma that has been passed down even today that we're still suffering mentally?
Since secondary school time, I always kind of dive back into a lot of things. I decided not to do subjects like history and so forth because I do believe that I believe from an early stage that history, what they taught in school, was not necessarily the history that we actually should know or should learn, because things in history painted a picture in the mindset of young students and so forth that would give them the ideology that the people who came and quote unquote discovered different islands and all these different things when people are already inhabiting these places and so forth. History lessons and so forth painted a very fairy tale picture of what these voyages and all these different things that these people came and embarked on was really about. And when you go and you do research and so forth for yourself, you kind of get to understand a lot of things. At the age of 19, 20, I went down to Trinidad and I was in a school of theology there for just about 2 years, close to 2 years.
You're a
And
theologian? Okay. Okay, sorry, continue.
yeah, so going in there, we did a subject that was called Old Testament history, and it basically gave you um, places and times and dates and all these different things that a lot of things took place. But one of the things I also gathered from studying theology was the fact that a lot of the things that we hold dear to our hearts came from a particular place. And let me give you a perfect example. As we also dealt with repetition, I love music. All right, I love writing music. I love singing. I love these different things. When soca songs are made, tell me which are the most catchy soca songs that you find persons singing for days on end. Is the ones that have the chorus just being repeated over and over. And that's something that we picked up from years of it happening to us. The repetition sounds good to us, especially as a black people. So when somebody start knocking a conch shell and they put on two lines and the line is the same and it sounds good to us. But think about it, we got that from somewhere. And slavery has brought us to a point whereby the level of repetition that was instilled in us knowing particular things has passed down from ancestors even up until us today, and we even see it in music. So with a lot of these things that we face, that our ancestors faced on plantations and all these different things, it definitely plays a big part in how we live our life today. So as the doctor rightly said, as Josh rightly said, we now have to come to a place whereby we understand a lot of the things that were done before, because it is an ideology that is placed upon the minds of persons that, you know what, forget everything, leave it alone, because you didn't have to face this particular
Trauma.
set of
Trauma.
yeah, you didn't have to
The
face
trauma.
it directly.
Yeah.
So why are you now thinking about the things that happened so far back? But I do believe that as black people, these things are subliminally passed on to us even by our parents, and they for themselves never even knew that was the case. So with that, I do believe that is a conversation that we must have, and I trust and hope that as we go and we dive into this conversation a little bit more, we can understand fully how these things came into being and how we are affected by it now today. Yeah.
Psychologically. All right. So I'll reverse the order. So I'll go to psychologist, and then I'll go to Dr. Bob after. Now we are disproportionately not included in scientific research when it comes to mental health as black people. And a matter of fact, there is this branch, as you mentioned, of black psychology. So why the need for black psychology? From your perspective, do you think that there needs to be more scientific research into our unique situation and find the connections and link them to present day mental illness or mental condition that we now going through?
So right now, we have an increasing number of research articles that are actually geared towards conclusions, right? We actually have right now Caribbean research. We have research on African Americans and Africans elsewhere. But here's, if we go backwards a little bit, right? Originally, if we're talking research, no, bear in mind that African psychologists did not have a seat at the table. And so psychology was actually developed in a Western world that had a lot of colonial and racist underpinnings. And exploitation was literally okay. there was something termed genetic genius or genetic intelligence, which literally excluded certain races, highlighted, of course, the masters as the ones who were intelligent, and all the exploitation and so on then would have been scientifically justified, right? So when Black people finally kind of got in, and by the way, if we go back as recent as the 1960s, a host of universities in the U.S. were still not graduating Black psychologists, right? And so late in the 1960s, we would have had the African American psychology emerging, and we had the Association of Black Psychologists also emerging. And when
That's right.
And when this started happening, what had to be done was deconstruction, as they called it. So it was necessary to literally deconstruct all the assertions that were termed scientific. For example, when you talk about hereditary genius, as it was mentioned, you are literally giving intelligence tests to a group of people, right? Now, in that group, you have persons from whose culture would actually be homogeneous with the test. So it was relevant and relatable. Then you have other people, right, who were taken from their homeland and they are now in a new environment, and you are giving them the same test. Naturally, the test would yield skewed results that indicate that African Americans are actually dumb. And on the flip side, the Caucasian students, the white students, were more intelligent. So Charles Darwin, for example, he had racist science, right? Hereditary genius was another bit of racist science, because the founders of psychology, it was really whitewashed in the beginning. But then I looked specifically at some men who actually initiated the conversation on Black psychology, and they had to, well, not had to, they literally kind of presented a context that was culturally relevant, right? Dr. Asa Grant III, he referred to the science as non-science or nonsense. He actually constructed an intelligence test to prove that the original IQ tests were culturally skewed, were not applicable to African American students, and as expected, African American students outperformed, right? So deconstruction had to take place initially, because and some may say, and some would have said, for example, well, why would we have been rebutting? Well, we had to rebut simply because those who spoke of us spoke on our behalf without knowing us. They said who we were by creating inventories and assessments that were not relevant and applicable, and so we did not actually do justice. We did not represent ourselves well enough. Once we began entering the room and actually sitting at the table, and we began now creating culturally relevant assessments, we came to understand, right, that we were actually intelligent. Now, granted, you would have had so many young people who actually bought into the lie. So many young people, when they kept on failing these tests, their conclusion was that, hey, I'm actually dumb. I'm actually, I'm not as good as, simply because they were part of, well, that's why it's called systemic racism, really. Racism that excludes certain cultures and favors others. Now, the thing about it is, cross-cultural psychology also came about as a result. But here's the deal, right? Cross-cultural psychology with is a branch of psychology that's close to anthropology and very different in its scope to the practice of psychology, focuses on the similarities and unique differences cross cultures, right? And we know that diversity is it's a reality. Diversity does not need any help. It exists regardless. How do we know this? If you bring even people from a group of people from Grenada and you have them seated in the same room, already you have diversity. Already you have different backgrounds and so on. Now imagine if you are going to bring people from different cultures, people from different ethnicities. Already you have diversity. Multiculturalism is when you actually make provision for the diversity that presents itself. Multiculturalism occurs when we can actually be objective enough to know that whatever we're designing right now, it's going to apply to this group and not to that group. So perhaps we can actually include in the assessment, for example, we can make it non-biased, so to speak. That's one thing. But on a separate note, there are some things that you cannot merge cultures in some cases, right? Sometimes there are things that apply to culture A that definitely do not apply to culture B. So when the African American psychologists finally had a seat at the table, what they were able to do was to make it known that there are a host of assertions that were being made about them that were categorically false, and they had a voice. They began having a voice, and therefore you had the Association of Black Psychologists developing. No, you have the APA as a psychological association, but you also have the Association of Black Psychologists as well, right? Which is operating today, and beyond that, we have CANPA, which is a Caribbean association, a Caribbean Alliance of Psychological Associations, which focuses on supporting Caribbean professionals, but also presenting Caribbean psychology, because psychology is never neutral.
That's right.
The psychology of our neighbors can be our psychology as well, right? So we have to ensure that the theories were developed in our context.
Right.
We have to ensure that the methods, we have to ensure that research that is done is not done in such a way to actually demonize or dehumanize us, which is what happened originally, right? And so now that we have a seat at the table, believe it or not, more research is being done from our context, from our perspective.
Okay. Dr. Bob, I want to bring you in on this conversation. But before I do, I would just like to relate another research that I came across. It was actually published on the BBC. So in 2013, a study found that intergenerational trauma. Let me say that again. So in 2013, a study found that there was an intergenerational effect of trauma associated with scent. Now, it's an experiment that used lab rats, and researchers, they sprayed a scent or a chemical called acetophenone, which has a scent of cherry blossom, through the cages of the adult male mice, and at the same time zapping their feet with an electrical current, right? So over several repetitions, the mice associated the smell of blossom with pain. Shortly afterward, these males were bred with female mice, and when the pups smell the scent of cherry blossom, they become jumpy, nervous, than the pups whose father hadn't been conditioned to that fear, right? And that research goes on, and there's many debates over it. And that's the thing with scientific research. Yes, if it cannot be measured or counted, then it is just excluded sometimes. And I find that too can be problematic. Now, as an educator, I want you to chime in on this, because as we discuss mental illness, it is important that, as Josh Hector indicated, there needs to be more research that is culturally appropriate and culturally um, within the cultural context of the people that are being studied. I want to get your input into that conversation.
Yeah, that is important, and I would answer that question by going back before I go forward
Sure,
into
appreciate
my current context. There are a lot of excellent Black theorists, a lot of excellent Black scholars. For example, when we were talking today about intergenerational um, trauma here, but I'm sure many people don't know of who Franz Fanon is, and I'm sure probably Mr. Hector does.
I know. I
But
know.
Franz Fanon, and you know as well, so that's
Yes.
a good thing. But with respect to the Franz Fanon, and some might say he probably is the forerunner
Yeah.
to the theoretical forerunner to a lot of the work that Dr. DeGruy did, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if you read his book,
Black
Black
skin, white
Skin,
mask.
White
White
Mask,
mask.
there you
Yeah.
go, right
Yeah.
now. I only found out about Franz Fanon during
Funny.
my tenure at Howard University, pursuing a PhD. Right?
Oh,
I didn't
wow.
know who
Really?
Franz Fanon was, and if you ask the average Grenadian who has a master's degree in whatever field, they wouldn't be able to tell you who Franz Fanon was, or who Said was,
Mm,
or what African theory
mm,
is, or what grounded
is.
theory is in the context of our experience. When we think of things like theory, and when we hear theory, theory tends to be framed from this very white Eurocentric Western perspective that does not attempt to make sense or give meaning to our own set of lived experiences. Yes? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm saying all of this to say that it is important for us to understand that the quality of education we receive in the Caribbean, in and of itself, is an injustice to our identities. It is an injustice to our lived experiences as people of African descent in what Paul Gilroy calls the Black Atlantic. Okay? And so there has to be a complete reframing of our education systems to be able to reflect what our reality is, what our lived experiences are, because we only know of certain people. Okay, books tend to be written in the perspective of the white man of Eurocentrism, so
Mm,
that when, for example, if I were to have a conversation about the African spiritual experience that manifests itself as the spiritual Baptist faith, or manifests itself as Santeria or Orisha, okay, we tend to look down on that. We tend to look down on that as being evil, as being inherently evil. But where did that perception come from? Right? That perception came from that period of slavery. When, again, I am very open about my opposition to organized religion. I am not religious, and I make no apologies for that. And given the context of slavery, the role of the church in also psychologically conditioning us to think a certain way, even about ourselves as Black people. Okay, the idea of you look at the churches, you have this white man who is framed as God, right? This white man who's framed as Jesus. That is not a real artistic representation of who Jesus is. If you're a Christian, Jesus was from the Middle East, so he could never have a straight nose. Mary could not have that blue eye that she has, right? But we have been conditioned. Imagine growing up with that image and that impression in your mind from a child, that this is what God looks like. This is what these particular deities look like. Obviously, there would be some inferior complexes that emerge there and that exist there. Even our own self-hate for African spirituality as well is another example of that. But I'm sorry, I'm trying to Please
No,
repeat the question again, because I think I
no,
got
no,
carried
no.
away
You
there a little
answered it.
bit.
No, no.
Yeah.
You answered the question. You answered the question. It's essentially as an educator. We're not included in the conversation of scientific research.
Correct. So
Yeah.
the
So you
point
answered the
is
question.
the point is, and here is the deal. This idea that we have to find a seat in the table, and this is what attending an HBCU taught me. That this idea that you have to find a seat at the table. No, 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 no. You have to be able to create your own table, okay? Build your own seat and sit on that table. Because in the context of representation, what you find is that on the mainstream table, the way that we are represented is not a true and accurate picture of our lived experiences. Okay? You cannot, for example, have a conversation about economic liberation, or you cannot have a conversation about economic independence with a white man who has been the beneficiary of generations of intergenerational transmission of wealth. Wealth has been passed on from generation to generation. The slave owners in Grenada who owned the enslaved, and that was the historic nomenclature, but we were held against our will. And I think that is the narrative that should be reframed. The narrative should be reframed in that way. As people who were held against their will, these kidnappers, right, they were compensated to the tune of millions of pounds for kidnapping people. Okay? But yet we teach in our school, and we valorize people like Christopher Columbus. And I still hear people say that he discovered. Well, I don't know what you can discover when there were people living on Camahan. That's the Grenada is a colonized name. But I'm saying all of this to say that we have to come to a place where we are creating our own table. But as part of the process of building our own table, building our own chair, is also saying that we have to completely dismantle the way that we teach history. We have to completely dismantle our ways of thinking with respect to colonialism and slavery, which is why reparations are extremely important for us. But there has to be a total and complete reframing of the education system so as to reflect, so that it reflects these lived experiences that we had as a people. I am not interested in what a white theorist says, because that white theorist comes from a particular normative space. Normative here meaning that mainstream space. That white theorist does not reflect the experiences of people of color, whether you are an African American, whether you're Afro Caribbean. Okay, so I would stop here.
Okay. No, I appreciate your contribution. And I want to now segue into now some of the psychological the residual effects and the manifestation of these psychological traumas that have been passed down and how it now manifests in the now. But I would just like to just track back a bit just to contribute, just to add to what you said, Dr. Bob. Imagine that in white scientific research that is still being used today. I think the gentleman is called Carl Linnaeus. I think he was a father of taxonomy. And his scientific research was just finding skulls that look white in a particular mountain, and said that this was the original color of humans. And this man is the father of, I mean, come on. And he's, a matter of fact, they even say that he's the father of anthropology. Imagine that. And this is accepted. This is in our scientific books today. But anyway,
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Okay, comment quick. Yeah,
on
comment
what,
quickly, yes.
in addition to what Dr. Bob said
Mhm.
regarding religion and ourselves. And I just wanted to read a part of the Bible. And when we look at it, we understand why we are who we are. And there are a lot of Black people who defend this stance, right? Because they believe in it. And in 1 Peter 2:18, it says, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. And so when you have somebody holding the Bible, and this Bible tells, first of all, the oppressor that it's okay to be harsh, and these people must be in reverence to you as they are to God. And then when this oppressor now shows the slave the Bible and says, but it is written in the Bible, and this word has been inspired by God, that you are to be in reverence to me and to obey me, because that is your that is what you owe to God, right? And because we as a people we hold religion so near and dear, it is easy to control us when these things are written. And it says the same thing. It says in Ephesians 6:5, Colossians 3:22. So they made a point to have this kind of literature scattered across the Bible, so that this book that we pick up daily, that we use for our strength, this is what we're going to read. And we now are going to defend and say, oh, well, the slavery back then is not the same in the Bible, it's not the same as chattel slavery and these kind of things. But the fact that you could own a human being and treat them in a particular way, even harsh, and in the Bible it states how you can buy a slave, you can own people, and this kind of thing. It is written on how you can trade human lives, right? So the fact that it is there and we hold it, it is time that we liberate ourselves and start separating the trash from what is good in the book.
Well, and let me just add that, and of course this is not a theological discussion. I'm
Theological
not a
discussion.
theologian, and
But we
let me
have
say
one on
full
the panel.
disclosure. Let me say full disclosure. I attended a Catholic institution in Grenada. I'm not going to say the name of the institution, although I'm sure that's common knowledge. But that does not preclude me from critiquing the institution. But just to add to what Sam says, the etymology of obia. In other words, I wonder if we know what the etymology of obia is. Where is that particular term obeah? Where did it come from? That is not an African term. That is a term that was developed by the oppressors in order to criminalize African spiritual practices that were brought by our African ancestors from West Africa. Because intrinsically, Africans in West Africa were not Christian, they were Muslim because of that Islamic expansionism that occurred there. But they also came with their Yoruba practices, their Igbo practices,
Ifa
right?
as well.
The Ifa practices and things like that from that part of the world. And so what happened was when they mourned their dead, on the plantations, they used these particular African spiritual practices in order to pay tribute to these slaves that were killed by the oppressors and the kidnappers. Okay? So when I hear people talk about, well, they work in Obia, that is also another example of post-traumatic slave syndrome there, right? In the context of just how we define what is good versus what is evil. Okay? This is not, this is not, this is historic. This is factual. You can go look it up. Okay? And the idea, the role of the church in forcibly converting people to a faith that to which they didn't belong. The idea of organized religion is not a West African concept. It's not, it never existed. Now, if you want to come to Jesus, or you want to come to faith uh, through free will, then that's okay. You have a right to do that. But the fact is, a lot of our ancestors did not come to organized religion and faith through free will. They were forced and coerced, and they were forced to drop their faith practices in order to pick up a religious practices that says this is okay, but we are also going to force you to demonize and to look down on spiritual practices that your ancestors practiced. I mean, I see that in Grenada all the time. We look down on the spiritual Baptists. We do. Okay?
Yeah.
There is particular bigotry with respect to how we treat people, and we call them witchcraft workers and black magic workers. Where did the term black magic come from? That's another one, right? So I'm going to stop here. But I think this conversation is very important, and we need to continue to have these conversations. But a big part of the problem is, here is a big part of the problem. Our institutions are so entrenched. Our schools are so entrenched with organized religion, and we have other people who are just stuck in their ways, if you will, that I do not know that we will get to a place where we would want to unlearn and dismantle these things. That's why the work that Brother Hector is doing is important. That is why the work of really unlearning and dismantling is so critical, but it has to come also with some institutional imperatives. Governments and leaders have to decide that this is what we want our education systems to look like. And people have to have the courage to do that. And I don't think they have the courage to do that because everyone is okay with the status quo.
Status quo. Yeah. And that's
I heard somebody say that they're happy. They thank God for slavery, because if it weren't for slavery, they would not have come to know Jesus Christ. And I would stop there.
Okay. And look, guys, we have a theologian here, so we gotta be careful what all you say.
No. But I went to Bible school too, you know.
No, I'm just saying. Yeah,
it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting thing. And studying the Bible with a preconceived mindset of what you're looking for is going to lead you in a particular direction. If you go into scripture thinking, okay, well, white man this, white man that, then you're going to be swayed a particular way. If you go into scripture thinking that is black this, black that, whatever the case may be, you're going to be swayed in a particular direction. So studying the Bible does not you're not going to get what the Bible is going to give you from going into it with an already made up mind, if I would say. So that's a whole nother topic within itself. But just backtracking to what Mr. Bob was rightly saying, we definitely have to upset the entire platform when it concerns the teaching of history and all these different things. We have to upset the entire thing because, as he rightly said, one man's perspective, especially when it comes from a particular agenda which was already put forth to them, is not going to show forth the things that black slaves and so forth had to endure during the period of time that they were enslaved. Now, we also have to remember that slavery didn't just start 400 years ago. It predated that. It was a long time before slavery was in existence. The thing is now it hit black people different because we still today are seeing some very harsh effects of what slavery did to us. And going back to the original going back to the topic going back to the topic at hand, we are definitely suffering mentally as black people with a lot of the things that we had to face years and years and years and years upon years. And it starts with a conversation like this bringing us into a platform whereby we can actually put these things forth, Colin, and be able to actually talk about it and find solutions to it. So I trust and hope in the next coming questions and so forth, we start diving into those.
But that's what I know. We segue into some other topics, but I want to just bring it back home where we talk about, our psychological, our state, our minds, the state of our mental health in the Caribbean, and how we view getting professional help. I believe Josh is just having a bit of challenge there, so I will direct a question, just not a a question that will throw you off, because I know you're not a psychologist, Dr. Bob. That's not your field. Yes, but we will just have a conversation, because even though you're not a psychologist, you understand the psychology of Caribbean people of Grenada to a certain extent, and the fact that we are scared, or not scared. Should I say scared, or we do not seek psychological help, or we only do so when it's dire, just terrible. So I want to get your views on that.
Well, again, it goes back into the history, and I want to go back into the history again. One of the legacies of that period, one of the psychological legacies of this period of colonialism and slavery. And by the way, to Brother Williams' point about, I agree with you that slavery hit us differently, because we were the only civilization on earth responsible for the Industrial Revolution in the West. Okay, we built countries and civilizations for hundreds of years. The idea of Western society would not have been possible without our free labor. So good on you there for making that observation. But to your point, the idea of mental health being a taboo subject goes back to that period, and seeking help and not wanting to be vulnerable, because there is the perception that there is a culture of secrecy in our communities. But why is there a culture of secrecy in our communities? Because on the slave plantations, our people had to maintain a certain level of secrecy in order to get certain things done. So, for example, if you're going to be planning a rebellion, as we have witnessed in Jamaica through the different rebellions by the Maroons there, as we have witnessed in Grenada through Julian Fedor, as we have witnessed with the Garifuna people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we can go on and on and on. We can talk about Nat Turner's rebellion, and all of these different rebellions could not have happened without some level of secrecy. And I think we have passed on that legacy of secrecy to successive generations now, where families don't want to talk about certain things that happen in their own lives. Families don't want to talk about the uncle who is engaging in dirty behavior, sexually molesting the child. All right, it goes back to that, and again, we can also think about Josh spoke about beatings. Okay, that is another example of that psychological trauma, and we also have to recognize this idea of being of getting mental health is mental health support is viewed as if you're crazy, as if there is something in your pathology that is inherently wrong with you, right? And so it becomes a case where, because you have these particular ideas around mental health, people do not go to get mental health, especially in small societies like Grenada, where people will start judging you for wanting to get mental health, and it is not treated mental health support, and it is not treated as a regular health issue as it should be treated as. I don't know if you guys are hearing me. Are you guys?
Yes,
Are you
perfect.
guys there?
I'm hearing
Okay,
you.
all
Yeah,
right. I
yeah,
just
yeah.
want to make sure. But to continue, when we look at places like the mental institution in Mongay, we say
Bongay,
that
yeah.
when people go there, they go to the pink house, or they're mental, they this, they that, right? Without acknowledging that that is a particular sickness of the mind that needs help like any other thing. And then you also hear about, well, this family is of this condition because they have a generational curse. This guy, I remember there was a guy in Grenada, I'm sure he probably had Tourette's. He probably had Tourette's at some point. And, you know, the narrative in Grenada is, well, they do him. They must have worked Obia on him, right? But he had a particular mental condition that people really didn't understand. There were some people in my village who talked to themselves, right? And they responded to what they were saying. Okay. And we frame these people as if well, somebody do them, so that's why they're behaving like that. And that culture still exists. Even you hear pastors and whatnot, and I say this with no apology. They would talk about people with certain mental illness. People who would have mental illness, they would say, well, because that family has some kind of intergenerational curse, that's why they're behaving like that, without acknowledging that that intergenerational curse is as a result of colonialism and slavery. And nobody wants to talk about that. But what we want to do is to continue to glorify these facades of that period. We glorify people like the Queen, and we have Her Majesty's Prison, and Princess Alice Hospital, and Princess Royal Hospital, and all of these colonial names. We still glorify these people as though they're continuing to do favors for us. They're not continuing to do favors for us. They left us very damaged, as Josh said, learned helplessness. But there's also the idea of what's it now, what that idea, Stockholm syndrome. And I think we do have notions of Stockholm syndrome where we have come to really respect and admire the people that oppressed us. We have become like them without recognizing what they have done to us. So I will stop here.
Yes, I
Correct.
want to jump in here and just include Josh in the conversation. Josh, are you're okay? You're
Yeah, I was
okay.
having a similar issue,
Yeah, I
but I
realize.
think I'm good now.
Good, wonderful. All right, so I'll just bring in quickly as we zero in on psychological issues and the mental issues that we go through if, at present. Now I know that people right now are feeling lonely, burnt out, and depressed. That's just a fragile state of our mental health now with social media, technology, and with COVID. It just makes it hard for young people to to identify their trauma, and that will definitely hinder their ability to cope with it or to seek professional help. Now, my question to you is this changing? Because you're, as a psychologist, I would like to get your experience. Is this changing? Do you see more young people coming to get psychological support? Is it something that they are forced to or mandated to accept? What's the reality going on with the issue of psychology in Grenada?
So I actually started practicing psychology in 2016, right? And then it was rather different. It was not, the service was not utilized as much as it is being utilized now. Between then and now, even separate and apart from COVID-19, the clientele has increased by leaps and bounds. A lot of males, right, young and old, and ladies as well. But people are right now, and I'm saying right now, and I really mean within, let's say, the last 2 or 3 years, people are actually open to the idea of receiving help, receiving and taking care of their mental health, which would have been a taboo before. And
That's right.
the taboo is something. I always compare the taboo, or anything that is taboo, I would compare it to a mushroom. If mushrooms grow in darkness, right, you can easily have mushrooms erode the foundations of a wooden house or building because nobody noticed them. But the moment you actually get some light on those mushrooms, they die. And so what is happening, I think, the curtains are being pulled a bit, gradually, more and more and more, to shed light on these mental issues, and people are coming to recognize that this taboo that is being perpetuated actually doesn't make any sense at all. Because you do not technically, right? You do not receive. Well, you do receive a clean bill of health if you are physically okay, but the mental aspect of us, right? If that is out of line, then we are not going to be well overall, holistically. There's a Turkish proverb that says the fish rots from the head first. If we are not well, if our minds are not stable, we definitely cannot function as well as we should be, as well as we should function. And I've seen so many people from all different walks of life, different ages, just reach out to receive mental health without shame, without fear or reservation. And I think that is a positive side.
Okay. While you're speaking, I would also like to get your input, and we'll just, as we zero in and we conclude this conversation, I would like to get your perspective. I know that you're not a psychiatrist, because there's
Right.
two different fields of there's psychology and psychiatry. But as a psychologist, I'm sure you're aware of borderline personality disorders and other mental disorders that we're not accustomed to getting diagnoses for. I would just like you to chime in on that, because I'm not a psychologist, and to be honest with you, if you go and Google it, I could identify at least 50 people who I think might have borderline personality disorder. Yeah.
Well,
including me.
here's the thing, right? And I'm so very careful with this all the time, because I generally I don't want to say something that would set people free to start diagnosing everybody left, right, and center.
No. I'm sorry. No, that was just that was maybe a sour joke. I shouldn't have done that. My apologies. My apologies. No, I'm straight. Okay.
Okay, good. Right. So, so personality disorders, you're talking about patterns of enduring patterns, rather, of inner experience and behavior. And what these do is they deviate significantly from the expectations of the individual's culture. And these deviations are also very pervasive. They mess with a person's functionality. They are stable, and the individual cannot turn them off, right? So with personality disorders, there are a few, right? And in different clusters. Borderline personality disorder would be found in cluster B, right? Where you have in there narcissistic personality disorder as well as histrionic personality disorder. And I have seen personality disorders in therapy. However, borderline has not yet been one of them. What I see mostly is the narcissistic personality. Well, actually, no. Let me not say that I see the narcissistic personality disorder, because technically, by nature of what the narcissistic personality disorder is, you do not see such a person in therapy, because nothing is wrong with them. In their minds, nothing is wrong with them, right? It is everyone else's fault, and they are superior, and they have this grandiose about themselves. So that you're not going to see them in therapy. You're only going to hear people complain about their interactions with them. Antisocial personality disorder. And let me just, on that note, you know how people tend to say, oh, why are you moving so antisocial? Right? Because you're not talking.
But
that is grossly inaccurate, because what they mean is you are not being sociable. To be antisocial means that you disregard the rights of others. You have no issue with hurting somebody, causing or inflicting pain. So people who are prone to criminality tend to be antisocial. So I can highlight narcissism as the personality disorder that I have encountered most indirectly. Borderline personality disorder, I am yet to encounter.
You're yet to encounter. All right. Also, I would just want to bring everyone into this conversation. Kellen, Sam, Willem. in terms, and I'm just throwing it out, and whoever catches the ball, I want you to dunk it or windmill it. But it's really providing support now. Understanding that we have people out there dealing with mental issues, some more severe than others. What type of support can we do as people on the ground to help move this conversation forward and to assist people dealing with trauma, mental health issues, and so forth? Because, like I said, in Grenada, the stigma still exists, as Dr. Bob mentioned. It still exists, and it is not helping. It's actually hurting more than it helps. So I'm just throwing it out to anyone, Dr. Bob, Sam, Willem, just
We
chime
allow
in on
Dr.
that
Bob to go
reality.
first. Dr. Bob can go
Dr.
first.
Bob, Dr. Bob, the floor is yours.
Well, I think what Mr. Hector is doing is extremely important and commendable, and we need, if we can multiply Mr. Hector 10 or 20 times over, that would be great. Yes.
Kudos, man.
No, it's very important. It's
Yeah.
very important, and
Yep.
let's just throw that out. I believe, Mr. Hector, you attended the Great Presentation College, so we
Hey,
have
hey,
that.
hey, there's a bit of bias here. Hold on.
But but I digress. I digress. But no. On a serious note, it's important that we begin this the way that we have systematic, and I'm putting on my health communications hat now. The way that we have these health campaigns for HIV and AIDS, prevention, we need to start having public health campaigns that focuses on men and mental health, or on mental health in general. We need to start finding ways in which we can start to destigmatize the idea of getting mental health. That it does not become a situation where somebody has to go and get mental health in secret or hide because you don't want people in your community to know, oh, you don't know who I see going by the psychologist, they mental, or she end up in the pink house, they mental, you understand? So the way that we have come a long way with respect to destigmatizing HIV and AIDS, that came from a result of doing concerted, systematic public health campaigns. That needs to be done. The other thing that needs to be done is that through our various institutions, the church, schools, um, social organizations, social clubs, they also have to have mental health training and education as part of what they do, as part of their agendas. So, for example, I do not know that psychology is a course that is taught at the secondary school level in Grenada. At least when
Not
I
now.
was there, it was not taught.
No, it's
Psychology needs to be taught at the secondary school level in the same way that we teach human biology. Yes, we also have to treat things like mindfulness, and things like that, breathing exercise and things like that, in the same way that we treat prayer in schools. Now, some may say that mindfulness, you hear when I was growing up in Grenada, you hear that, oh, you don't do yoga. Yoga is of the devil. What? That's ridiculous. Okay, but we need to start having things like mindfulness exercises in school, conflict resolution, de-escalation, that is centered on mental health and wellness in our schools, and different community organizations also need to play that role as well. Okay, and so if we have a systematic, and I look at things through systems lenses. You can have all of these great conversations about mental health and what we should do, but if we are not making those changes through the systems and the institutions that currently exist, we are not going anywhere. But we also need to, in our own communities, in our own individual capacities, okay, have these conversations with your buddies at the barber shop, with your buddies at the rum shop where you lime in, where you lime on Wall Street, wherever you lime in Grenada, whatever it is. Okay, you have these conversations about mental health, right? And I think that would go a long way to really reform and restructure how we think about this issue. Because and one thing I need to also talk about, which I believe someone probably raised it, is just the notion of men of Black men in particular showing vulnerability. Society tends to shun on Black men who show vulnerability. So in other words, a Black man is not supposed to cry, right? A Black man is not supposed to show emotion. A Black man is not supposed to go get mental health support. Okay? As if our pathologies are somehow different from women in that way, that women are soft and this and that, and sensitive and this and that. Okay? That also needs to change. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of men refuse to come forward and suffer in silence because of that particular sanction they receive from society. When society tells them that, well, you're soft, something wrong with you. What were you going for mental health? What's that about? Something wrong with you, boy. Right? That has to change. These things have to change. Okay? So it's both at an institutional level, which I think is most critical, a policy, as well as at an interpersonal level. Those of us with the education, and final thing I would say is people tend to view education as getting a degree. You have a degree, so therefore you're educated. No. That's nonsense. A degree is important. It is functionally important to be able to climb ladders. But if you are not going to use your education and impart that knowledge to impact society, then you're wasting your time. So those of us who are educated, we ought to use that knowledge that we have to impact society and to make those changes that we're talking about, because it will never happen without that. So I've said my piece, and thank you all for this opportunity.
Wonderful. The floor,
I
Sam,
am.
Willem. Yes, anyone? Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Bob spoke about men and feelings, because just before this show, I had a conversation with two men, and we were talking about that. And it's not a case where men must be counseled, but women must be counseled as well, because men are expected to be a particular way, and they act a particular way because the women want them to be that way. And we can't fix the men without fixing the women, because if those are the expectations, then we're going to become undesirable to these women, right? So we both have to seek counseling. Now, as it relates to getting help, we have a serious problem with stigma and confidentiality, especially in Grenada, where we live in a very small community. And people would go to counseling, and then somehow what is being discussed would be out in the streets.
We have to get Josh to chime in on that aspect, but continue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we have a problem. Now, there's a website called betterhelp.com that I know people who used it. They use it, and people will actually call you on the phone. It's not very expensive. It's accessible. And I read something as a question had related to social media and young people, and what it does to our mental health. What BetterHelp did say is that there's something called Facebook depression, where you see people living a particular life and you believe it's real, and you can't attain that, or you're going through some kind of thing and you can't have that. And so there's, I don't want to call it envy, but you want to be that person now, and it actually makes people feel bad about themselves. And then there's a fear of missing out, so you have to be on there all the time because you don't want to miss a beat. And then comes with it, because of the blue light from your phones, the devices, and whatnot, there's sleep deprivation. So the world we live in now is actually making things worse for us, and our generational trauma is now compounded by all the stimuli that we have coming at us all the time. So we have to heal ourselves of the past, and we have to learn how to manage what we are going through right now, because while we are still living in the past and trying to do what happened, there are things that are still they're happening to us right now. And so we can only start there, but we have to address them all. And I just want to speak to our Caribbean people that when people come to prayer meeting to discuss something that's personal, it is not for you to go and gossip about. I'm just going to throw that out there. because people would come and pray about things in church and then they would hear it on the streets. People need help. They're coming to you because they need you and you need to be confidential and we need to stop. Thank you.
Okay, Willem, you have some words before I bring in Josh. Oh, Josh, hold on. So, Willem, sorry, my apologies.
Go ahead.
Yes, yes. Josh, you want to come in? Just chime in on that.
So okay, no. Let me go because Sam mentioned some things that I definitely want
Confidential.
to jump on.
Yes.
Well, starting with the
Confidentiality.
stigma, right? Stigma first, right? Because this is not a scare tactic on my part, but I tend to want people to understand that stigma doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because when we stigmatize, what we're actually doing is we're putting a mark of disdain on a specific group for a specific reason, saying that us and them, okay, we are not like them. But here's the strangest part about stigma. It is also saying that we will never be like them. And when it comes to mental health, it's important for people to understand that mental health is literally on a continuum. You do not either have it or you don't. We tend to have varied levels of functionality. So much so that we just might be one episode or incident away from a mental breakdown, or one incident away from the onset of some type of psychological or mental disorder, right? And so stigmatizing is actually really and truly suggesting that we are immune and we will never, ever, ever have those challenges, when in fact, that just might not be true. And so if we find ourselves challenged similarly, then we would kind of want the patience and empathy of others as well. This is why stigmatizing really doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? Next, beyond that, no, the issue of confidentiality. I'm going to speak personally because I am in this day by day. First of all, confidentiality ought to be a personal principle, right? Really and truly, we know that there are people who work in certain institutions who may divulge information about people, like results on a health test or bank account information, or this is something that actually happens, right? So confidentiality literally has to be, first of all, a personal persuasion. So I say to people, I am both legally and morally bound to keep your information safe and secure, unless you tell me that you plan to kill somebody, kill yourself, or that a child or vulnerable adult is being abused. These are the grounds upon which I can breach your confidentiality. Now that I have said that, proceed to speak. But you don't speak before I inform you of the grounds upon which I can breach your confidentiality. And so everything and anything that does not fall within the category of those things that I have to disclose cannot be disclosed. I'm saying cannot. I'll also say should not, but I say cannot, because persons who are in such a position, it is best that we understand that we are both protecting ourselves and the persons with whom we interact. And then the larger scheme of it is that we are protecting a discipline, we are protecting a sector that is already fragile. People are already apprehensive. And so if you add that ingredient to the recipe, it means that people are going to actually be more afraid to reach out for the help that they need. And you know, that's the most I'll say on that. Now, as it relates to social media, right? Truth be told, I often say that we have been physically distanced even before COVID-19. And to some respects, we have also been socially distanced. How do we know this? Because people go out and everybody is sitting at the table in a restaurant while they are on their phones talking to other people. Social media, and Dr. Bob a while ago referred to mindfulness. Social media is, while it has its uses, and of course, I am not one to demonize social media, but it also has it needs to be managed, because there is an addictive element of this thing called social media, right? And what we don't realize that we're doing in forming this habit, literally, once you become attached to social media, you are literally teaching your brain to want a particular thing. The synapses in your brain are firing in a particular direction. So guess what? Let's call it the synaptic legacy, as they say. Why do people habitually just reach and check their phones, even if they did not get a call, did not get a message? Because their brains are wired now to do this, because they have done it over and over again. You see, repetition, yet again, over and over and over and over, so that there is a disconnect from reality, and the world that some people live in, not all of us, of course, but the world that some of us live in is virtual. It is all about what he or she is doing or not doing. And that disconnects us from reality. It also disconnects us from ourselves. When it comes to healing, when it comes to resolution of trauma, there is a level of insight that has to take place, meaning a person has to, whether they do so themselves or they are guided, they have to be able to look within themselves, identify the pain, the hurt, or even identify things about themselves that are not so nice, so that they can resolve these things. But if we are distracted, and mind you, I've been speaking to people and I recognize that every generation would have had its own distractions, right? Distraction is not a recent thing. But here's the issue about this generation now. Before, people had to leave home to go to their distractions. People had to literally go somewhere else. Now the distractions are right there in your house with you. And so, sadly, I'm not saying if we are not careful. I think we are already at the point now where social media has begun to block us from ourselves, has begun to inhibit the time we spend introspecting, looking within, and so we are literally moving in autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
We're in autopilot, and when we are in autopilot, you see this mind again. If you leave this mind to do whatever it wants, it will mess things up. You have to literally regulate your mind. You know, I show people this this bit of machinery. It's a tool called a power trowel that you use to smooth concrete after you lay it. It has a handle on it, and if the operator lets it go, it's going crazy. Meanwhile, it's messing up all the work, and it's painful to stop it. And this is your mind. You have to keep a handle on it. If you're distracted, then your mind is literally doing whatever it wants, and that is dangerous. That's a dangerous prospect. So, I mean, I don't know where to start in terms of, you know, I could say no, use social media less, but hey, this is something, right? This is, and guess what? We are on social media right
We are
now,
on social media,
which means that it has its benefits, right? But all of this, you know, would boil down to me, and I think I'll end on this, is that we have to begin to normalize mental health and recognize that addiction to social media is also a mental health issue, right? It's not just if you are schizophrenic or borderline, but any form of behavioral addiction is also a mental health issue. And I say, let's repeat this thing until, because, you know, I show people a hot tub, right? And I say, what's that? And everybody says, oh, that's a jacuzzi. And I said, well, how do you know? A jacuzzi is a brand of hot tub. But jacuzzi they've repeated jacuzzi so much that every time people see hot tub, jacuzzi. Every time people see toothpaste, Colgate. Every time people see washing detergent, Breeze, right? We literally have to
Breeze.
repeat this thing. Yeah, we have to repeat this thing, have these discussions until they become so normal people get it.
Mm-hmm.
I yield
Wonderful.
my
Yeah.
time according to the people in Congress.
No, no, look, and that's what I appreciate, this conversation. I know, I appreciate you gentlemen's time, but I want to give Willem just the flow now. I know that I interrupted you. My apologies, but the flow is yours, to chime in and give your.
I just want to commend everybody on a splendid discussion this evening. Mr. Hector, you are definitely uh, a man of impactful words. Um, Mr. Bob, you yourself, you have definitely put some things out there that didn't fall on infertile soil. I know a lot of people are going to take a lot of these points and so forth and try to even help them their own selves, as well as help their community as we go on through. So for me, there isn't really much to say, but I just wanted to share this story. There was a gentleman by the name of Anthony Johnson. After it was basically the story of this gentleman who, after being a slave for so long, he then had the ability to, well, he worked and owned property by doing something that they call work for or labor for ownership back in those times. And what ended up happening to him is that he was a slave. He worked, then acquired his own plantation, his own property, and so forth, and inherited slaves as well. So here we have a black man who came from slavery, inherited a plantation, and basically inherited slaves and started buying more slaves. Um, so it definitely speaks to what we were basically discussing, because how could you come from slavery understanding what it is, yet for all go back, have a position whereby you can flip the script and change the game, and yet for all kind of end up doing the same thing that a white man did to you back then. It is a trauma. It is something that speaks volume, because a lot of people in this day and age may say, but no, how come you do that? Why it is he didn't free everybody or whatever the case may be? While in the mindset of much, it would have been the right thing to do, but this man, probably that's all he knew, and that's all he could act out at the end of the day. The story has a lot of different details and so forth to it, and a lot of people have posted different things concerning that particular story. But in essence, that's kind of what happened. So I trust and hope that we take what has been said tonight and be able to apply it into our own lives. Mainly, our gentlemen, there are so many ways and means that we could go out and get help that we really need, and it does say that, to our men, we do need to go out and seek mental health, because a lot of things might happen to us, and then it also trickles down into our relationships as well. Things could happen to us. We might get hurt. Women do hurt men as well. All right, it's not only men that hurt women, but women do hurt men as well. But because of the stigma and the things that we have known for so long, we wouldn't seek the help. A lot of men commit suicide and all these different things. And I do believe that, if I'm not mistaken, based on the last set of research that I was doing, that the suicide rate after broken relationships and so forth is higher amongst men than women. So
Yeah.
uh, please be mindful of these things, and let's see how we could try and flip the script, flip the system, and be able to start dealing with these urgent matters that we need to be attending to. So that's my take. I just want to commend everybody. Colin, big up your whole self same way.
Appreciate you, bro. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the panel. Dr. Bob, Josh, I really appreciate you guys. Sam, for chiming in as well. I think this conversation is long overdue, and I would really just use the opportunity to close here to answer the question that I put forward to the group in the beginning. So the answer to that question is, the person who put the dog in the cage is to blame. However, he's not responsible, because he could say, well, look, I freed you so I could go. The dog, however, unfortunately, as sad as the situation is, the dog is responsible to cope and to fix the damage that was done. So that's the answer to the question. All right. I hope that our audience in the comment section, I didn't see any questions, but I appreciate you. We appreciate all our viewers, and I really would like to take the opportunity to remind us that we need time for mindfulness. We need time for our mental health. It's important. COVID has taught us something, that you cannot just keep going, and expect to continue going. There comes a time when we have to stop and get checked and check ourselves. So guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate the conversation. Was good, very intellectual from Dr. Bob, Josh, Hector. Appreciate Sam, Willem. Good night. Blessings to y'all. And I hope y'all enjoyed the conversation as well as I did.
Thank you.
Last greetings.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Have a good night.
All right. Good night, guys.